He won the lottery thinking he'd get rich, but they gave him a beautiful Apache slave instead. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sun over Copper Junction was hard and unkind, the kind that made sweat sting your eyes and turn the air into something a man had to push through. It was late summer of 1879. The town sat quiet most days, a few wagons passing, a few drunk men leaning in the shade of the saloon. But today there was a crowd, dust swirling around boots, voices rising, the sound of coins clinking into a tin box. Gideon Hale came in from the North Trail just after noon. His horse was tired, same as him, both covered in the fine layer of dust that came from 3 weeks driving cattle across dry land. He was 37, built from work, his shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled, the sun burned deep into his skin. His dark hair hung damp under his hat brim, his beard rough and a few days old. He had the kind of face that showed how much time he'd spent alone, quiet, alert, never relaxed. He had come into town for supplies, nails, lamp oil, a bit of coffee, salt. He didn't plan to stay long. He'd been avoiding Copper Junction for months. Too many drunk men with stories about Indian wars. Gideon had no stomach for those stories anymore. He'd served once as a supply scout and left after seeing what command called victory. He still carried those nights in his head. As he rode in, he noticed people gathered near the saloon, all shouting around a makeshift platform. A hand-painted sign leaned against a barrel. Copper Junction Lottery, $1 ticket. He slowed his horse. The sheriff stood on the platform, a round man with small eyes and a voice that could carry half a mile. "Step right up, boys. Big prize tonight. $1 chance. The best prize we ever had." Gideon frowned, tired of noise, ready to keep riding. But he needed nails and coffee, so he tied his horse by the post and started toward the general store. "Hey, Hale," someone shouted. It was Darren Pike, a drunk ranch hand he knew from past work. "You got $1? Come win yourself something worth having." "Don't gamble," Gideon muttered. Darren laughed. "This ain't gambling. It's entertainment." The crowd laughed with him. The sheriff waved Gideon over, a voice full of mock charm. "Come on, Hale. Don't act better than the rest of us. Might just change your luck." Gideon stopped. His jaw clenched. He'd learned long ago that saying nothing drew less trouble than refusing outright. He took a silver coin from his pocket and set it on the table. "Fine. 1 ticket. Then I'm gone." The sheriff grinned. "Number 16. Keep it close, friend." Minutes passed. The crowd drank, joked, and jeered, the kind of cruel laughter that always sounded the same in towns like this. Then the sheriff climbed back up, waving a paper. "All right, boys. Time to see who's got fortune on their side." He reached into the box and pulled out a slip. "Number 16. Laughter and shouts erupted. Someone slapped Gideon's shoulder. "Well, hell, you actually won something." The sheriff stepped aside and motioned toward a small cage behind him. 2 men dragged it forward. Inside, crouched and bound, was a young woman. She was Apache, her skin bronze and dry from sun, her black hair braided and tangled, her wrists tied together in front of her. Her dress was torn, the deerskin ripped at one shoulder, the beadwork missing in patches. She didn't cry or beg. Her eyes stayed still and focused, dark and defiant. The laughter stopped. The sheriff lifted his hand, proud. "Gentlemen, your prize, a real Apache girl. Took 3 men to bring her in from the ridge. Now she's the property of our lucky winner." Gideon didn't move. For a long time, he just stared. The noise around him faded. He felt his pulse climb, his stomach tighten. This wasn't a prize. It was another war memory walking straight back into his life. The sheriff grinned wider. "Step up, Hale. Claim what's yours." Gideon's throat was dry. "What the hell is this?" "A bit of fun," the sheriff said. "You can keep her, sell her, free her. Don't matter none. Rules say she's yours." The men laughed again. Some whistled. One shouted, "Take her home, Hale. You look like you could use company." Gideon looked around. Every face was waiting for him to play along. He felt the weight of their expectation. The same kind of weight he'd felt years ago when soldiers waited for him to obey an order he knew was wrong. He'd followed back then. He wouldn't this time. He walked to the cage. The woman's eyes lifted to meet his, not pleading, just wary. She looked like someone too tired to hope, too proud to cry. "Unlock it," Gideon said. The sheriff blinked. "Say again." "Unlock the damn cage." "You sure about that?" "You walk her out. She's yours. Your problem, not mine." "I'm sure." He crouched, cut the rope around her wrist with his knife. She flinched when the blade touched the cords, but didn't pull away. When he opened the cage, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped out, barefoot, trembling from the heat and fear. The crowd murmured. Someone said, "He's crazy." Gideon took off his coat and put it over her shoulders. "Come on," he said quietly. They walked through the street in silence. No one stopped them. The sheriff just smirked and spat into the dust. Gideon saddled his horse, helped her mount behind him. She didn't resist, just held his coat tighter. As they rode out of town, the shouts and laughter faded behind them. Only the sound of the wind and hoofbeats followed. After a while, she spoke, voice barely a whisper. "You not like them?" He didn't turn. "No, I'm not." The rest of the ride passed without words. He could feel her shaking against his back. He wanted to say something, that she was safe now, that he'd figure out what to do next, but words never came easy for him. By the time they reached his cabin, dusk had settled. The small house stood quiet among the low hills, a single lantern flickering inside. He dismounted, untied the gear, and offered her his hand. "You can stay here tonight," he said. She looked around, the cabin, the corral, the dog sleeping by the steps, as if trying to understand what kind of place this was. Finally, she nodded. Inside, he gave her water, then bread. She ate slowly, eyes never leaving him. When she finished, he gestured to the blanket by the fire. "You can sleep there. Door's not locked." She hesitated, then spoke softly. "You soldier?" He paused. "Was." She nodded, like she already knew. When she lay down, he sat by the table, staring at the empty plate, the quiet fire. He didn't know what to make of this, of her, of himself. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Not again. Outside, the wind shifted across the hills. Inside, the cabin held two people who had nothing left in the world, except maybe the start of something neither of them understood yet. The sun over Copper Junction was hard and unkind, the kind that made sweat sting your eyes and turn the air into something a man had to push through. It was late summer of 1879. The town sat quiet most days, a few wagons passing, a few drunk men leaning in the shade of the saloon. But today there was a crowd, dust swirling around boots, voices rising, the sound of coins clinking into a tin box. Gideon Hale came in from the North Trail just after noon. His horse was tired, same as him, both covered in the fine layer of dust that came from 3 weeks driving cattle across dry land. He was 37, built from work, his shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled, the sun burned deep into his skin. His dark hair hung damp under his hat brim, his beard rough and a few days old. He had the kind of face that showed how much time he'd spent alone, quiet, alert, never relaxed. He had come into town for supplies, nails, lamp oil, a bit of coffee, salt. He didn't plan to stay long. He'd been avoiding Copper Junction for months. Too many drunk men with stories about Indian wars. Gideon had no stomach for those stories anymore. He'd served once, as a supply scout, and left after seeing what command called victory. He still carried those nights in his head. As he rode in, he noticed people gathered near the saloon, all shouting around a makeshift platform. A hand-painted sign leaned against a barrel. "Copper Junction Lottery, $1 ticket." He slowed his horse. The sheriff stood on the platform, a round man with small eyes and a voice that could carry half a mile. "Step right up, boys. Big prize tonight. $1 chance. The best prize we ever had." Gideon frowned, tired of noise, ready to keep riding. But he needed nails and coffee, so he tied his horse by the post and started toward the general store. "Hey, Hale," someone shouted. It was Darren Pike, a drunk ranch hand he knew from past work. "You got $1? Come win yourself something worth having." "Don't gamble," Gideon muttered. Darren laughed. "This ain't gambling. It's entertainment." The crowd laughed with him. The sheriff waved Gideon over, a voice full of mock charm. "Come on, Hale. Don't act better than the rest of us. Might just change your luck." Gideon stopped. His jaw clenched. He'd learned long ago that saying nothing drew less trouble than refusing outright. He took a silver coin from his pocket and set it on the table. Fine. 1 ticket. Then I'm gone. The sheriff grinned. Number 16. Keep it close, friend. Minutes passed. The crowd drank, joked, and jeered, the kind of cruel laughter that always sounded the same in towns like this. Then the sheriff climbed back up, waving a paper. All right, boys. Time to see who's got fortune on their side. He reached into the box and pulled out a slip. Number 16. Laughter and shouts erupted. Someone slapped Gideon's shoulder. Well, hell, you actually won something. The sheriff stepped aside and motioned toward a small cage behind him. 2 men dragged it forward. Inside, crouched and bound, was a young woman. She was Apache, her skin bronze and dry from sun, her black hair braided and tangled, her wrists tied together in front of her. Her dress was torn, the deerskin ripped at one shoulder, the beadwork missing in patches. She didn't cry or beg. Her eyes stayed still and focused, dark and defiant. The laughter stopped. The sheriff lifted his hand, proud. Gentlemen, your prize, a real Apache girl. Took 3 men to bring her in from the ridge. Now she's the property of our lucky winner. Gideon didn't move. For a long time, he just stared. The noise around him faded. He felt his pulse climb, his stomach tighten. This wasn't a prize. It was another war memory walking straight back into his life. The sheriff grinned wider. Step up, Hale. Claim what's yours. Gideon's throat was dry. What the hell is this? A bit of fun, the sheriff said. You can keep her, sell her, free her. Don't matter none. Rules say she's yours. The men laughed again. Some whistled. One shouted, Take her home, Hale. You look like you could use company. Gideon looked around. Every face was waiting for him to play along. He felt the weight of their expectation. The same kind of weight he'd felt years ago when soldiers waited for him to obey an order he knew was wrong. He'd followed back then. He wouldn't this time. He walked to the cage. The woman's eyes lifted to meet his, not pleading, just wary. She looked like someone too tired to hope, too proud to cry. Unlock it, Gideon said. The sheriff blinked. Say again. Unlock the damn cage. You sure about that? You walk her out. She's yours. Your problem, not mine. I'm sure. He crouched, cut the rope around her wrists with his knife. She flinched when the blade touched the cords, but didn't pull away. When he opened the cage, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she stepped out, barefoot, trembling from the heat and fear. The crowd murmured. Someone said, He's crazy. Gideon took off his coat and put it over her shoulders. Come on, he said quietly. They walked through the street in silence. No one stopped them. The sheriff just smirked and spat into the dust. Gideon saddled his horse, helped her mount behind him. She didn't resist, just held his coat tighter. As they rode out of town, the shouts and laughter faded behind them. Only the sound of the wind and hoofbeats followed. After a while, she spoke, voice barely a whisper. You not like them? He didn't turn. No, I'm not. The rest of the ride passed without words. He could feel her shaking against his back. He wanted to say something, that she was safe now, that he'd figure out what to do next, but words never came easy for him. By the time they reached his cabin, dusk had settled. The small house stood quiet among the low hills, a single lantern flickering inside. He dismounted, untied the gear, and offered her his hand. You can stay here tonight, he said. She looked around, the cabin, the corral, the dog sleeping by the steps, as if trying to understand what kind of place this was. Finally, she nodded. Inside, he gave her water, then bread. She ate slowly, eyes never leaving him. When she finished, he gestured to the blanket by the fire. You can sleep there. Door's not locked. She hesitated, then spoke softly. You soldier. He paused. Was. She nodded, like she already knew. When she lay down, he sat by the table, staring at the empty plate, the quiet fire. He didn't know what to make of this, of her, of himself. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Not again. Outside, the wind shifted across the hills. Inside, the cabin held 2 people who had nothing left in the world, except maybe the start of something neither of them understood yet. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them had planned. Gideon woke at first light, same as he always had, and went about the chores that kept the cabin alive. Chopping wood, checking the fences, feeding the horses. But now, there was another presence moving through that silence, and he could feel it in every small change. The sound of soft footsteps inside the cabin, the smell of herbs boiling with water, the faint hum of a tune she whispered to herself when she thought he wasn't near. Taya had begun to act like she belonged somewhere again. She cleaned without being asked, mended a torn sleeve of a shirt with thread she'd found in a drawer, even found use for the old flour sacks he had forgotten. She worked quietly, every movement careful, deliberate, as if she didn't want to disturb the air too much. That morning, he found her outside, hanging clothes on the line. The sun caught her hair, the black braid glinting slightly, and the wind pressed the thin fabric of his shirt against her frame. He turned his eyes away quickly, not out of discomfort, but respect, though he couldn't ignore the sudden warmth that stirred under his ribs. He busied himself tightening the rope on the corral post. "You shouldn't do too much," he said, not looking up. "Your ankle's still healing." "I'm strong," she said simply. "I know you are," he replied. He paused, then added still, "Rest sometimes. Ain't a race." She didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a folded shirt. He saw she had stitched a small tear along the sleeve, the work neat despite the coarse thread. "You fixed this?" "Yes," she said. "Men always tear same place." "Elbow." That made him smile faintly. "Yeah, we do." For a while, they worked in companionable silence. But Gideon's thoughts kept circling back to the same question. What would he do if the town came looking? The sheriff hadn't been a man to forget a challenge to his pride. A man like that might come riding, drunk and angry, deciding to teach a lesson. Gideon had seen too many men like that before. At noon, he went into the cabin and took his rifle from the wall, checking the chamber, cleaning it. Taya watched from the table, hands still, eyes sharp. "You think they come?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Maybe not today. Maybe not ever. But I'd rather be ready than sorry." "You fight again?" she asked. He looked at her a long moment. "Only if I have to." There was something in her expression then, not fear, but an understanding of violence, the kind that came from living too close to it for too long. "You have killed," she said, not as a question. "Yeah," he said finally. "More than I care to remember." She didn't recoil. She only said, "Then you know what it does." He met her eyes. "That's why I don't want to do it again." That night, the wind rose hard against the cabin. Rain came in short bursts, rattling the windows, tapping the roof like restless fingers. Gideon sat by the fire mending his saddle strap while Taya crouched near the hearth, stirring a pot of stew. The small space felt warmer than usual. Not from a fire alone, but from the quiet sense that they had begun to trust one another, a little at a time. When she handed him a bowl, their fingers brushed. He looked up, and for a moment they both forgot the words they were supposed to say. Then she turned away, cheeks faintly flushed, and sat across from him. He took a bite, then looked at her. "This stew's better than anything I've made." She shrugged lightly. "I cooked for camp before all gone." He nodded. "You had family?" Her eyes went distant. "Father, brother. All taken. Soldiers came. Some die. I run." He said nothing, letting her talk at her own pace. "They catch me near river. Sold many times. Men laugh. Say Apache woman not worth gold. Only work." Gideon felt his chest tighten, not just from anger but from shame. He had seen scenes like that during the war years. People treated as trade, not lives. He rubbed his hand over his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve any of it." She looked at him, her voice steady but soft. "You're not same as them. I see that." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The firelight shifted between them, flickering against the walls, showing two faces that had seen too much but somehow hadn't hardened all the way. Later, when the rain turned to a steady pour, she moved closer to the fire. The blanket slipped off her shoulder, revealing the pale scar where rope had once cut deep. Gideon noticed and stood, picking up another blanket. "You'll catch cold," he said, setting it beside her. She looked up, her eyes tracing his face as if trying to read something hidden there. "Why you help me? Still you no tell." He hesitated, because when I saw you there in that cage, it was the same look I saw on the faces of people I couldn't save back then. I just couldn't walk away again. She didn't reply, but her expression softened, her gaze holding his for a moment longer than before. The night wore on quietly. The storm kept them inside. She sat near the fire, mending a torn strap from his coat, her fingers slow but sure. He watched her for a long while, realizing he hadn't shared space like this with anyone in years, not since before the war took everything he had. When she finally stood and laid the strap beside him, she said in a low voice, "You fix me, I fix you." Then she walked toward her blanket and lay down. He smiled faintly, turning her words over in his mind, not sure if she meant it literally or not. He set the strap aside and leaned back in his chair, the sound of rain steady against the roof. Outside, the storm kept the world distant. Inside, the air felt alive with something he hadn't known in years. Not love yet, but the start of something that might grow into it. Before he drifted to sleep, he looked toward the place where she lay. She was facing the fire, eyes closed, one hand resting near her chest. For the first time, she looked safe. And for the first time, Gideon felt that he wasn't alone in his home anymore. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a man takes when he's been holding everything in for far too long. Tomorrow, there will be more work, more questions, and maybe more danger. But tonight, in the sound of the rain and the quiet rhythm of her breathing, there was peace, fragile, real, and hard-earned. The storm passed by morning, leaving the air damp and heavy. The hills around Gideon's cabin glistened with moisture, every rock darkened by rain. Smoke drifted slowly from the chimney, and a faint trace of warmth clung to the inside of the cabin. The smell of last night's fire mixed with wet wood and stew left in the pot. Gideon woke before dawn, as always. He stepped outside barefoot, the cold ground shocking him fully awake. The valley below shimmered with fog, and the first streaks of sun crawled across the horizon. He checked the fence line, feeling the ache in his shoulder from old wounds. His thoughts kept circling back to the same things. How long before the sheriff came looking? And what would he do if they found her here? When he returned inside, Taya was already awake, sitting near the fire with the blanket around her shoulders, combing her hair slowly with her fingers. She looked up when he entered, not startled anymore, just aware. "You wake early," she said softly. "Habit," he answered, pouring water into the kettle. "Too many years on the trail." She nodded. "In camp, always wake before sun. Safer that way." That caught his attention. "You lived on the move?" "Yes," she said. "We follow rivers, hunt, trade. Never stay too long. When soldiers came, we run. Always run." She paused, eyes dropping to the floor. Then no more running. Gideon leaned against the table, watching her carefully. "You don't have to run anymore." "Not here." Her gaze lifted, uncertain. "You sure?" He hesitated. "I want to be." It was the truth. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. Not what law would say, not what the town would do, but he knew he wouldn't hand her over to men like the sheriff again. That much was decided. After breakfast, she followed him outside, insisting on helping with chores. Her limp had lessened, though every now and then he saw her wince when she stepped wrong. She carried a bucket from the well, steady despite the weight. "You don't need to." "I do," she interrupted. "I stay, I work." "That's fair." He wanted to argue, but he saw the firmness in her expression, the same quiet pride that had been in her eyes the day he untied her wrists. So he just nodded and said, "All right." They spent the morning tending to the horses. She moved slow at first, cautious, but the animals responded to her touch. One of the Mares, a chestnut with a nervous streak, usually didn't let anyone near. Yet when Taya spoke softly to it in her own tongue, the horse lowered its head. Gideon watched, surprised. "You've handled horses before?" Her lips curved faintly. "My father trained them. Wild ones from the plain. He say they only follow if you listen more than you pull." He gave a quiet laugh. "He sounds smarter than most men I've met." "He was," she said simply, then fell silent, the weight of memory pulling her gaze downward. By midday, the sun burned away the fog. They sat outside, eating what was left of the stew with dry bread. Gideon looked at her, noticing how her skin had regained color, how her eyes no longer darted to the door every few seconds. She was still cautious, but not broken. "You're healing," he said. She looked at her wrists. Some things heal, some don't. He understood that better than he wanted to admit. Later, he went to the barn to check supplies. The roof leaked in one corner, and a section of wall had warped. He knelt to fix it, hammering a new plank into place. When he looked up, Taya was standing in the doorway, holding a piece of cloth. "You tear your hand," she said, pointing to the small cut across his knuckle. "It's nothing." "Still," she said and stepped closer. She tore the cloth into a strip and wrapped it around his hand. Her touch was light but steady. For a moment, neither spoke. He could feel her breath, warm against his skin. When she finished, she looked up. "Now you fix me. I fix you," she said again, repeating her words from the night before. He smiled faintly, eyes softening. "Guess that's fair." That night, the calm broke. Just after sunset, while Gideon sat cleaning his rifle by the window, the distant sound of hooves reached them, slow at first, then steady. He rose, his expression tightening. Taya froze where she stood by the hearth. "Stay here," he said, voice low. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The light from the cabin spilled across the porch, cutting into the dark. Two riders approached from the ridge, silhouettes against the fading light. He recognized one by the outline of his hat and the lazy posture in the saddle. "Sheriff Denton." "Evening, Hale," the sheriff called. "Heard you've been keeping company out here. Thought I'd pay a visit." Gideon's stomach turned cold. "Ain't got company, just work." The sheriff smiled, his teeth glinting. "That right? Town folks say you rode off with a prize the other night. Don't tell me you let her go. That'd be a waste." Gideon said nothing. His hand rested on the rifle leaning by the door. The other rider, a younger deputy, spat into the dirt. "We see to take a look inside, that's all." "Not tonight," Gideon said. His voice was steady, but his pulse thudded hard in his throat. The sheriff tilted his head. "You forget who keeps law in this county." "No, I remember," Gideon said. "That's why I don't trust it." For a few long seconds, no one moved. The sheriff stared at him, eyes narrowing. Then he spat, turned his horse, and muttered, "You're a fool, Hale. Don't think she's worth dying for." They rode off into the dark. Gideon stood there until the sound of hooves faded. Then he went back inside. Taya was standing by the table, hands gripping the edge. "Who?" she asked. "Sheriff," he said. "They know you're here." She swallowed hard. "They come again." He nodded. "Yeah, probably will." Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "Then we fight." He looked at her, really looked, the resolve in her eyes, the fear buried under it, the strength rising through it anyway. He'd seen soldiers less brave. "No," he said. "We survive. That's how we fight." The room fell quiet. Outside, an owl called through the trees. Taya finally said, "You stay by me?" Gideon didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I'll stay." That night, neither of them slept. The fire burned low, and every gust of wind outside sounded like a horse moving through the dark. Gideon sat with his rifle across his knees, his eyes fixed on the door. Taya stayed near the hearth, clutching her blanket, silent but unafraid. Whatever peace they'd found was gone now, replaced by the certainty of what was coming. But even in that fear, there was something else, a bond that had shifted from gratitude to trust, from survival to something deeper neither of them dared name yet. For the first time, Gideon knew exactly what he was fighting for. And for the first time, Taya believed someone might truly mean the words, "You're safe here." The next morning came gray and still. The storm had cleared, but the silence it left behind felt heavy, as if the whole land was holding its breath. Gideon stood at the window, watching the valley for any sign of riders. Nothing moved but the wind dragging across the grass. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Behind him, Taya was at the table, carefully slicing dried meat into a pot. She worked with slow precision, her expression calm, but he could see the faint tension in her shoulders. She felt it too, the weight of something coming. "They'll be back," Gideon said finally. She didn't look up. "When?" "Soon." He moved to the corner where his rifle leaned, checked the chamber, then the old revolver on his belt. His movements were quiet, practiced, habits from a life he had tried to leave behind. Taya stopped what she was doing. "You fight again," she said, voice low but certain. He looked at her. "Only if I have no choice." "You always have choice," she said softly. "But you already choose." He didn't argue. She was right. He'd chosen the moment he stepped in front of that cage. For a while, the cabin was filled only with the sound of the fire and the scrape of his boots on the floorboards. Then she asked, "Why they hate us?" He turned, caught off guard by the raw honesty in her voice. "Because they don't know you, and because it's easier to hate what you don't understand." She nodded slowly. "They think I'm not human." "They're wrong," he said, firm enough to make her look up. Her eyes lingered on his face. "And you? You think I'm human?" "I know you are," he said. "And you're more decent than half the men I've met." She gave the faintest smile, one that didn't last long, but was real. "Then maybe I'm safe," she said. He wanted to believe that, but he couldn't promise what he didn't control. Later that morning, he saddled the horse and rode into the hills to scout. The ride helped him think. He followed a high ridge overlooking the main trail to Copper Junction. From there, he could see the thin dust lines left by wagons and riders moving in the distance. Too far to tell who they were, but close enough to keep him uneasy. When he returned near sundown, the cabin smelled of stew again. Taya was sitting by the fire, the light catching the edges of her hair. He noticed the window shutters had been reinforced with extra wood and nails. She'd done it while he was gone. "You fixed the shutters," he said. "Wind strong," she said, but he could tell it wasn't the wind she was worried about. They ate quietly. The sun fell behind the hills, and the sky turned red, the kind of color that made a man remember every bad omen he'd ever heard. When the meal was done, Taya washed the bowls in silence. Gideon sat back, staring at the fire. "Why you live alone?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. He hesitated. No one had asked him that in years. "My wife died," he said finally. "Fever took her. Took the baby too." She stopped moving. "Long time. 8 years. And after I stopped trying." She turned toward him then. Her expression was not pity, but something quieter, understanding. "You stopped living," she said. "Maybe," he said, "until that night in town." He met her eyes across the small room, and for a moment, neither looked away. The firelight flickered between them, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, a coyote cried. The sound broke the spell. He stood, moved to check the door latch, then said, "We'll take the horses to the back ridge tomorrow. Easier to hide there, if anyone comes." "You think they come soon?" she asked. "I'd bet on it," he said. That night, the wind came back, colder this time. Taya lay by the hearth again, but sleep didn't come easy. She watched Gideon as he sat at the table, cleaning his revolver. His expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and thought. After a while, she spoke softly. "If they come, I can fight too." He looked up, his eyes tired but kind. "I know you can, but I won't let them get close enough for that." "Maybe they take me again," she said quietly. "Maybe this time you not stop them." His jaw tightened. "They won't." "You sure?" He set the revolver down, stood, and knelt beside her. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the scars along his temple, the worn lines of a man who'd seen too much. "I'm sure," he said. She didn't move away. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, uncertain, but something had changed. Trust, small but growing, had taken root. She reached out and touched his hand, tentative but deliberate. Her fingers were rough, calloused, warm. He stayed there for a long moment, their hands resting together, neither speaking. Then she whispered, "You good man, Gideon." He almost smiled. "I try to be." For the first time since he'd brought her here, she leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. The gesture was small, but it felt like a world shifting. He didn't move. He let her rest there, her breath slow and calm. When she finally lay down again, he stayed beside her until she slept. He looked at her, at the bruises fading, the quiet strength in her face, and thought how strange it was that saving someone else could start to save him too. Outside, the night carried the sound of distant thunder, not a storm this time, but the echo of riders far away. Gideon heard it and knew it was only a matter of time before trouble reached them again. He checked the rifle, banked the fire low, and whispered more to himself than to her. "We'll be ready." Then he sat down near the window, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, waiting for the morning and whatever it might bring, knowing that from now on, he wasn't just protecting her. He was protecting the one chance either of them had at peace. The next morning broke with the sharp smell of rain still clinging to the ground, though the skies were clear again. The hills shimmered under the early light, and thin trails of mist lingered in the valleys below. Gideon was already outside, checking the horses. He hadn't slept much. All night, he'd listened to the far-off rumble that might have been thunder or hooves. Inside, Taya stirred from the bedroll near the hearth, blinking against the light that spilled through the cracks of the shutter. She looked around for him, eyes still heavy with sleep. For a moment, she watched his shadow move past the window, steady and tall, the kind of man whose silence said more than most words ever could. She stood, wrapped his coat tighter around her shoulders, and stepped outside barefoot. The air was cool against her skin. Gideon was tightening the saddle strap on his horse, movement efficient, like a man preparing for something. "Where you go?" she asked, her voice still soft from sleep. "Ridge Trail," he said, not looking up. "Want to see if the sheriff's men are camped close. Won't be gone long." She frowned. "You go alone. Best that way," he said, less to draw attention. Her brows furrowed. "You think I slow you?" He sighed, straightening. "No, but I can move quieter alone. If they see two, they'll know you're still with me." She folded her arms, stubborn, the wind lifting strands of her hair. "And if they come while you gone?" He hesitated. "Then you take the rifle and stay inside. You hear horses, you stay down. Don't open the door for anyone." She looked at him for a long moment. "You always say don't fight. Maybe sometime we must." He met her gaze, saw the strength behind her worry, and nodded once. "If it comes to that, aim low and steady. Don't waste bullets." When he mounted the horse, she caught his sleeve for just a second. "You come back," she said. "I will," he replied. He rode off toward the ridge, the dust rising behind him. The figure of a man who'd lived most of his life alone, now carrying the weight of someone else's safety for the first time in years. Hours passed slowly. Taya stayed close to the window, working her hands just to stay busy. She mended a torn shirt of his, cleaned the table, swept the floor. But her eyes kept flicking toward the hills. Every gust of wind made her tense. By midday, the quiet had grown unbearable. She went outside, carrying a bucket to the well, but her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. She thought she saw movement once, a flicker of light near the ridge, but it vanished before she could be sure. When Gideon finally appeared again, she exhaled sharply. His horse moved slower than before. He looked worn, and there was dust on his coat and a faint scrape along his cheek. She ran to meet him halfway down the trail. "What happened?" He swung down from his saddle. "They're moving this way," he said grimly. "3 men. Sheriff's one of them. I saw their camp just over the rise. Might be here by nightfall." Her breath caught. "They come for me. Maybe," he said. "Or maybe to remind me who they think runs this place. Doesn't matter. We'll be ready." He led the horse into the corral, his movements tight with focus. Taya followed him silently, her pulse quick and her hand shaking even as she tried to hide it. "You scared?" he asked suddenly, glancing at her. "Yes," she admitted. Then, after a pause, "But not same way as before." "What do you mean?" "Before, scared to live. Now, scared to lose." That hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her, wanting to say something, but not trusting his voice. Instead, he went inside and began checking the rifle. The afternoon passed in tense silence. They packed supplies, doused the lamp oil, and filled water skins. Gideon placed an old revolver on the table in front of her. "If they get close, you use this. Aim for the chest, not the head." She nodded, her face pale but steady. As dusk came, they sat by the fire, neither touching their food. The cabin was too quiet. Outside, the wind had died completely. Gideon sat by the window, peering into the darkening hills. Taya sat across from him, clutching the revolver in both hands. "Tell me true," she said finally. "If they come, you run?" He turned to her, shaking his head. "No, I stand." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because running's what I did all my life. From war, from people, from guilt. I'm done running. She studied him, eyes soft but fierce. Then I stay too. He wanted to argue, but her tone left no space for that. When the first sound came, a distant crack of hooves, both froze. Gideon blew out the lamp, leaving only the orange glow of the dying fire. He grabbed the rifle and moved to the door. 3 silhouettes emerged against the moonlit ridge. The sheriff's voice carried faintly. You can't hide forever, Hale. Town's law says that girl's property. Hand her over, and maybe we forget this happened. Gideon raised the rifle, resting it against the doorframe. You'll have to come take her. There was a pause, then laughter. You sure you want to die for a squaw? Inside, Taya flinched at the slur. Gideon didn't answer. His finger tightened slightly on the trigger. The riders advanced slowly. One man dismounted, creeping closer with a pistol drawn. Gideon could hear the crunch of gravel under his boots. He waited until the figure stepped into the faint light spilling from the window and fired once. The shot rang through the valley, echoing off the hills. The man fell hard, his gun clattering to the dirt. The horse reared, panicked, and bolted. The sheriff cursed. You just signed your death, Hale. Gideon ducked back, reloading quick. He heard the second man fire into the cabin wall, splinters bursting into the air. Taya crouched behind the table, gripping the revolver tight. When the next shot came, Gideon returned fire, 2 quick rounds. One hit wood, the other found its mark. The second rider cried out and toppled sideways off his horse. Only the sheriff remained. His voice came from the dark. You think you can hide behind her? You'll hang for this. Gideon leaned out, eyes searching the dark. You'll hang for selling people like cattle. There was a pause. Then the sheriff's voice came lower, colder. You always were a fool, Hale. The next flash came fast, a muzzle flare from the ridge. The bullet tore through the window and buried itself in the wall inches from Taya's head. She gasped, ducking low. Gideon aimed where the flash had come from and fired once. The echo thundered, then silence returned. For a long time, neither moved. Then Gideon stepped outside slowly, rifle raised. The sheriff's body lay slumped near a rock, hat fallen, revolver still in his hand. He stared for a long time, the weight of it settling in. It wasn't triumph, just the grim stillness that came when violence ended because there was no one left to continue it. When he came back inside, Taya was standing near the table, her hands shaking. He set the rifle down. It's over, he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes wide, searching his face. You hurt? No, he said. Are you? She shook her head. Then, slowly, she crossed the room to him. Without hesitation, she placed her hands against his chest. You stay, she whispered. You keep word. He nodded, voice rough. I said I would. For a moment, they just stood there, the firelight flickering between them, the smell of smoke and gunpowder still thick in the air. Finally, she leaned her forehead against his shoulder, trembling, not from fear but from the release of it. He lifted a hand, rested it gently against the back of her head. It's done, he murmured. You're safe now. Outside, the night was quiet again. The sheriff and his men would never return. But inside the cabin, something else had changed, not just safety, but belonging. For the first time since the war, Gideon felt the heavy armor of loneliness begin to slip away. And for Taya, the weight of running all her life finally eased. The fire burned low as dawn began to rise beyond the hills, washing the world in pale gold. Neither spoke again. They didn't need to. The silence between them said everything, that they had survived, together, and for the first time, both had someone worth staying for. The first light of morning crept through the gaps in the shutters, painting thin lines across the wooden walls. The air inside the cabin was still, heavy with the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and wet earth. Outside, the last of the night fog lifted from the valley, leaving behind a quiet that felt too deep to trust. Gideon sat at the table, elbows on his knees, staring at the rifle leaning beside the door. His hands were steady now, though the blood along his knuckles had dried dark. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the sheriff's face in the dirt, that last flicker of shock before it was over. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the old feeling that violence, once invited, never really left a man. Taya moved softly across the floor. She had washed her face and changed into one of his shirts that hung loosely over her frame. The sleeves rolled to her elbows. The sight of her, alive and calm after everything that happened, steadied him more than he expected. "You know, eat," she said quietly, setting a bowl of stew in front of him. He looked up, his eyes tired. "Ain't hungry." She sat opposite him, hands folded around her own bowl. "You killed man last night," she said. Not as accusation, just fact. He nodded once. "Had to." "You think it wrong?" He leaned back, looking at the fire. "Killing's always wrong. Sometimes it's just what's left." For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was heavy but shared. Finally, she said, "In my tribe, when man kill to protect, he must not hide his heart. You saved me. That not wrong." He met her eyes, searching for some ease in her words, and found a kind of peace there. "You really believe that?" She nodded slowly. "If you do not, you never sleep again." He gave a faint, weary smile. "You sound like someone who's been through this before." "I see death," she said quietly. "Too much." That truth hung in the air. They both had ghosts behind them. The war for him, captivity for her. And now they shared a strange kind of freedom that neither knew how to handle yet. After breakfast, he went outside to bury the bodies. He didn't say it, but he couldn't leave them for the coyotes. Whatever they'd done, they were still men once, and men deserve grave. Taya followed him, carrying a shovel without being asked. "You don't need to help," he said. "I help," she replied simply. "They hurt, but still they human. Earth make us same again." They worked side by side, the morning sun climbing higher. Sweat ran down their faces as the shovels hit hard ground. When it was done, they stood there a moment in silence. Gideon took off his hat, wiped his brow, and said, "That's the end of it." Taya looked at the 3 rough mounds of dirt and whispered something in Apache, words soft and low, carried away by the wind. He didn't ask what she said. He just stood beside her, head bowed. By afternoon, the cabin was quieter. The air felt lighter now, as if something old had finally settled. Gideon patched the bullet holes in the walls, cut fresh boards for the window frame, and cleaned the rifle before hanging it back in its place. When he turned, Taya was folding blankets, humming under her breath, a small melody, low and steady, like she was stitching peace into the air itself. He found himself watching her again. The way she moved now was different, slower, not from pain, but from belonging. She didn't glance toward the door anymore. She didn't flinch at every sound. For the first time, she looked like she was home. When she caught him looking, she tilted her head slightly. "You stare much," she said. He looked away, half smiling. "Guess I'm not used to quiet like this." "Quiet not bad," she said. "Means life." That evening, he repaired the corral fence while she cooked over the fire. The smell of cornmeal and herbs filled the cabin. As he worked, he noticed something small he hadn't before. The way she hummed the same tune each time she cooked, like it was a prayer for the living. When the meal was ready, she handed him a bowl and sat across from him again. "You fix house," she said. "Now it's strong." He nodded. "So's the one living in it." She gave a shy smile, eyes lowering. "You think I stay here now?" He set down the bowl, meeting her gaze. "If you want to." "I have no place," she said softly. "No tribe, no name left. But here, I breathe again." "You got a name," he said, "and this can be your place." For a long moment, they said nothing. Then she reached into her small bundle of things, the few she had carried when he found her, and pulled out a piece of cloth. Worn, frayed, with beads sewn into the edge. "This for my mother," she said. "I keep all years. Always for home. Maybe now it hang here." He took it carefully, fingers brushing hers. "Yeah," he said. "It belongs here." She walked to the window, tying the cloth to one of the beams. The fabric fluttered gently in the warm breeze. The cabin felt different after that, fuller somehow, like a wound beginning to close. As dusk came, Gideon stepped outside, leaning on the porch rail. The valley spread wide and gold before him. No smoke on the horizon, no riders in the distance. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't feel the need to move on. Taya joined him quietly, standing beside him. The air between them was calm. She looked out at the land, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone now." He turned to her. "No, I'm not." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe both of us find what we run from." He looked down at her hand resting against the rail. Slowly, he reached over, his fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she slid her hand into his, her grip small but firm. They stayed that way, side by side, as the sun went down behind the hills. The sky burned orange, then softened into quiet blue. Behind them, the cabin glowed with the light of the hearth, a small, steady flame, holding against the dark. The danger had passed, but something deeper remained, not the rush of survival, but the peace that came after it. The story of how they met had started with violence and fear, but standing there now, Gideon realized that maybe the rest of their story could be written in silence, in work, and in the simple act of staying. He tightened his hand gently around hers. "You hungry?" She smiled, glancing at him. "Always." He chuckled under his breath, the sound quiet and rough, the first real laugh in years. They turned back toward the cabin, the door still open, the fire waiting inside. And for the first time in both their lives, neither felt the need to look over their shoulder again. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither Gideon nor Taya had known they needed. The valley began to heal from the violence of that night, just as they did. The scent of gunpowder faded from the walls, replaced by the smell of stew, cut hay, and freshly sanded wood. Gideon rebuilt what the bullets had broken, patched walls, replaced shattered boards, even carved a new latch for the door that once had been kicked in by strangers. Taya helped him with everything, her movements sure and patient. She no longer flinched at the sound of hammering, no longer paused when he walked too close behind her. There was still quiet between them, but it had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was comfort, a space where words weren't needed because each gesture already spoke enough. On the fifth morning since the sheriff's death, Gideon rode into Copper Junction for the first time. The trip couldn't be avoided forever. He needed nails, salt, and news. As he saddled the horse, Taya came to the doorway, holding his coat. "You go alone?" she asked, her voice calm but threaded with worry. "Yeah," he said. "No one look twice if I ride in quiet. I'll be back before dark." "You sure they not wait for you?" "I'm sure enough," he said, though he wasn't completely. He took the coat from her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "Lock the door behind me, and keep the rifle close." She nodded, but when he turned to leave, she caught his sleeve just long enough to whisper, "You come back. Always come back." He met her eyes. "I will." The ride into town was slow. The land stretched empty for miles, just wind, dust, and sky. Gideon's mind replayed the last time he'd seen Copper Junction. The cage, the crowd, the laughter. He hadn't realized how deep that memory had cut until he saw the town's wooden rooftops again in the distance. When he rode down Main Street, the place felt smaller than before. The saloon porch was half empty, and conversations died when he passed. The sheriff's office door was shut tight. Someone else would take that badge soon, and Gideon wasn't sure what kind of man it'd be. He went to the general store, bought what he needed, kept his head low. The storekeeper, an older man with white whiskers, glanced at him and said, "Heard Denton's gone. Some say he picked the wrong fight." "Some fights need pickin'," Gideon replied. The man nodded slowly, neither judging nor agreeing. "Ain't the same without him barking orders. Guess that's not a bad thing." Gideon paid, loaded the supplies, and left without looking back. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun was sinking low. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and steady. Taya was outside waiting, her braid loose, her face soft with relief the moment she saw him. "You came back," she said quietly. "Told you I would." She took the reins, led the horse to water, and stayed beside him as he unloaded the goods. "Pound?" she asked. "Quiet," he said. "Too quiet. Folks know what happened. No one's going to come looking again." "Good," she said. Then, after a pause, "You think we stay here now?" He looked around, the hills glowing gold in the fading light, the cabin standing solid, smoke curling against the sky. "Yeah," he said. "We stay." That night, after supper, they sat outside by the small fire he'd built near the porch. The stars stretched wide above them, sharp and bright against the black sky. The air was warm, full of the sounds of crickets and the soft rustle of the wind through grass. Taya sat close beside him, her hands resting in her lap. "You never tell me," she said after a while. "Why you come to Copper Junction before?" He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Work mostly. I was looking for quiet. After the war, after losing my wife, I just wanted a place no one knew me." She turned slightly. "You find it." "I thought I did," he said, "till that night. Then I realized quiet ain't the same as peace. And now," he looked at her, the firelight catching the reflection in her dark eyes. "Now I think I got both." She smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth softening. "Then maybe I win too." He frowned lightly, curious. "What did you win?" "Life again," she said. "I think maybe that prize better than lottery." He couldn't help but laugh quietly, shaking his head. "You got a point there." Her smile deepened at the sound, rare as it was. They fell quiet again, watching the flames flicker. After a while, Taya shifted closer. "When I first come here," she said, her voice low, "I think maybe you just like other men. Angry, alone, dangerous. I ready to run. But you never touch, never yell, never try take what not yours. I don't understand why." Gideon turned the small stick in the fire, pushing the embers. "Because I saw too many men who did. Because I didn't want to be one more thing that hurt you." She studied him in the firelight, then said softly, "You different." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe just tired of being what I used to be." The fire burned low. He could feel the warmth of her shoulder against his arm now, close enough to notice the steady rhythm of her breathing. She leaned her head against him, hesitant at first, then sure. "Thank you," she whispered. He swallowed, his voice rough. "For what?" "For not walking away." He looked down at her, her hair brushing against his jaw, her eyes half closed. He thought about all the things he could say, all the things he never had said to anyone. But words didn't seem right. So instead, he lifted a hand and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. She turned toward him slightly, their eyes meeting in the fire's soft glow. The air between them tightened, heavy and quiet. And for the first time, Gideon leaned in and kissed her, slow, unsure at first, then certain when she didn't pull away. It wasn't desperate or hungry. It was the kind of kiss that came after too much silence, too many lonely years, when two people finally stopped running. When he pulled back, she stayed close, her forehead resting against his. "You sure now?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'm sure." The fire cracked, and above them the stars shimmered brighter. The world outside their small cabin would go on with its cruelty, its laws, its noise. But here, in the middle of nowhere, a man who'd once lost everything and a woman who'd once been treated as nothing had found something that didn't need words. As the fire dimmed, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, her voice a whisper against his chest. "You free now, Gideon." He looked out across the dark valley and nodded slowly. "So are you." The night settled around them, quiet, wide, endless, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like home. The sun rose slow and gold over Copper Valley, the kind of morning that didn't rush anyone. Dew clung to the tall grass outside the cabin, and a thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney where Taya had started the fire early. Gideon stood out on the porch, one hand resting against the post, watching the horizon as if waiting for something that didn't come. But for once, the waiting didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. Weeks had passed since that night of gunfire. The land had healed, and so had they. No riders had returned from town. The sheriff's name faded from conversation, replaced by newer gossip. The townsfolk had their own lives, their own troubles. Gideon and Taya's story, the one that began in that cruel lottery, had become just another rumor, half believed, half forgotten. That was fine with him. Quiet was better. Inside, the cabin had changed. The holes in the wall were gone. A new window frame let more light in. Taya had sewn curtains from rough muslin she found in his supply trunk. She had hung her mother's beaded cloth above the hearth, and every time Gideon looked at it, he felt a small sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Taya came to stand beside him, a cup of coffee in each hand. Her hair was loose this morning, falling over her shoulders, and she wore one of his old shirts tied at the waist with a strip of leather. The shirt hung wide on her, but the sight of her in it stirred something deep in him that had nothing to do with desire. It was warmth, the quiet kind that comes when a man finally feels safe again. She handed him a cup. "You watch Sky every morning," she said. He smiled faintly, eyes still on the hills. "Habit. Used to check for riders. No riders now." "No," he said, taking a slow sip. "Not anymore." She leaned against the porch rail, her bare feet brushing the rough wood. "You think we stay here long?" He glanced at her. "You want to leave?" She shook her head. "No. I just think maybe someday we go to Newtown. Maybe people forget everything. Maybe start again." He considered that. "Could be," he said. "But I like it here. It's quiet. Soil's good. Enough land to keep a few horses and a small garden." "You grow things?" she asked with a teasing tone. He grinned. "Trying to. You'll see." Later that morning, they walked down to the creek together. Gideon carried a small sack of seed potatoes. Taya carried a bundle of herbs she'd gathered near the ridge. The air smelled of wet dirt and pine. He knelt by the bank, digging small holes in the soft earth. She crouched beside him, handing him one potato at a time. "You do this before?" she asked. "Back home, yeah," he said. "My father had a small farm before the war. Taught me how to plant, how to wait. Guess I forgot most of it." She smiled. "Now you remember." "Now I remember," he said, returning her smile. They worked in silence for a while. Birds moved through the trees, their calls echoing faintly across the valley. When they finished, he sat back on his heels, wiping the dirt from his hands. "That's it," he said. "Now we just wait." Taya touched the soil gently, pressing it down. "Good things take time." He looked at her, his voice low. "Yeah, they do." Back at the cabin, she started cooking while he repaired the small barn door that hung crooked since the last storm. The smell of beans and smoked meat drifted through the open window. The sounds of her moving around inside, the clatter of a pot, the scrape of a chair, had become the sound of home to him. When he came in, she was setting the table. "You wash," she said, pointing to the basin with a small smirk. He raised an eyebrow. "Giving orders now?" "Someone must," she said, smiling. He chuckled, but did as she said. When they sat down to eat, the light through the window was soft, catching in her eyes. He noticed how different she looked now. Stronger, her face fuller, her spirit unbroken. The girl he had let out of that cage wasn't gone, but she had become something more, a woman who had chosen life again. Halfway through the meal, she looked up. "Gideon," she said softly, "if I ask something, you tell truth?" "Always." "You ever think about her?" she asked carefully. He froze for a second, then nodded slowly. "My wife." "Yes." "Sometimes," he said. "Not like before, though. It's more like remembering a place I used to live. Feels far away now." She looked down at her hands. "You think she angry you with me?" He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "No," he said quietly. "I think she'd be glad I finally stopped living like a ghost." Taya's eyes lifted, searching his. "Then I glad too." He squeezed her hand gently. "You saved me as much as I saved you." The afternoon passed easy. Gideon fixed the saddle, while Taya dried herbs and hung them from the beams. Later, she brushed down the horses, humming the same tune she always did. Watching her, he thought how strange it was that peace could grow out of something so cruel, that two broken lives could find steadiness in each other. As the sun sank, they sat outside again, the sky turning the same copper shade as the town they'd left behind. Taya rested her head against his shoulder, her hand sliding into his. "You think we ever go back to town?" "Not unless we have to," he said. "Nothing left there worth seeing." "You think they forget us?" "Let 'em," he said simply. "We got our own world here." The air was cooling fast, and she shivered. He stood, fetched the blanket from inside, and draped it over her shoulders. When he sat back down, she leaned closer, her head fitting easily against him. After a long silence, she spoke again. "When I first saw you that night, I think maybe you another kind of jail. But now I know you were door." He turned to her slightly. "Door?" She nodded. "Door that opened to life again." He smiled, quiet and real. "You were the same for me." The stars began to appear, scattered like white dust over the deepening sky. The sound of the creek carried faintly through the still air. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, but even that didn't sound lonely. Inside, the firelight flickered through the window. Gideon stood, offered her his hand. "Come inside," he said. "It's getting cold." She took his hand and followed him in. He closed the door behind them, the soft click of the latch sounding like a promise kept. She sat by the hearth while he stirred the embers back to life. The glow lit her face, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You still keep watch?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore. There's nothing left to guard against." "Then you free," she said again. He sat beside her, the warmth from the fire washing over them. "Yeah," he said. "We both are." Minutes passed, in comfortable silence. The only sound was the fire's quiet crackle and the wind whispering outside the cabin. Taya reached out, resting her hand on his arm. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we fix garden fence. Then maybe build smokehouse." He smiled. "Sounds like a plan." "You think too much of work," she teased. He chuckled. "Keeps me from thinking of everything else." She leaned closer. "Then maybe tonight you think of me." He turned, his eyes catching hers in the dim light. "Been thinking of you since the night I found you." She smiled, faint and knowing, and rested her hand against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Then I stay." "You already have," he said. Outside, dawn began to color the sky again, the start of another quiet day. There would be chores, small repairs, meals, laughter, maybe even song. But under it all, there would be peace. Their lives had begun in the noise of cruelty, but they ended that noise with silence. Chosen, shared, and unbroken. When Gideon rose to open the shutters, the light flooded in, touching the small beaded cloth above the hearth. The wind caught it, making it sway gently, its beads glinting in the sunlight. He smiled, turning to her. "Looks like home now." She met his gaze, her voice steady and sure. "It is home." And for the first time in years, Gideon Hale truly believed it. The man who had once won a lottery he never wanted now stood beside the woman who had been its prize, and together they had made something no crowd, no law, no cruelty could ever take away. The story didn't end with escape or vengeance. It ended with what both of them had forgotten how to find: peace, love, and the quiet strength of staying.